My mother sent me a bill for $467,000 on Mother's Day, titled The Cost of Raising a Disappointment, and she didn't send it privately. She broadcast it to our entire family group chat of 26 relatives. I replied with a single photograph. By the next morning, 25 of them had blocked her. The 26th was my grandmother, and what she did afterward was far worse than anything I could have imagined. My name is Maren Voss. I'm 32, a forensic accountant in Chicago, and this is how I dismantled my own family with nothing but math. It was 9 in the morning when my phone buzzed on the counter. I expected a text from a friend. Instead, there was a notification from the Whitfield family circle, our sprawling group chat of aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely knew. My mother, Sandra, had posted a PDF. The title alone made my stomach drop. The Cost of Raising a Disappointment. It was a fake invoice, itemized with terrifying precision: my childhood braces, groceries multiplied across 18 years, electricity, water, even community college tuition I had paid for myself while she refused to contribute a dime. The final line read, emotional damages for failing to secure a high-earning husband. At the bottom, in bold red font, $467,000, with a message to the whole chat demanding payment by Friday or permanent exile from the family. I should have cried. Instead, something clicked in my professional brain. I am a forensic accountant. I hunt hidden numbers for a living, and $467,000 was an absurdly specific figure. Nobody fabricates an emotional debt with an odd number like that. They round up, they go dramatic, they ask for $500,000. A number that precise means a real ledger exists somewhere, and a Friday deadline means a real consequence is coming due. My mother wasn't just being cruel, she was panicking. While relatives flooded the chat calling me heartless, I muted it and opened my laptop. If Sandra suddenly needed $500,000 in cash, her pristine debt-free image was cracking somewhere, and real estate is always the first place people go when desperate. I pulled up the county property records for her address and began digging. That afternoon, my brother Tyler ambushed me in the marble lobby of my firm, dressed like a startup founder who'd never launched anything, demanding I pay up or he'd humiliate me in front of my bosses. I let him rant, then calmly reminded him that I had wired his rent for 3 straight years while his revolutionary tech company burned cash with 0 revenue and 0 product. His arrogance cracked into rage, and security escorted him out. But as they dragged him toward the doors, he screamed one line that changed everything. "Mom's house is on the line because of you." Sandra had always bragged about owning her home outright. If it was suddenly at risk, she'd secretly borrowed against it. Back at my desk, the county database confirmed it, and $200,000 home equity line of credit taken out 18 months earlier, and above it, a notice of default filed 3 weeks ago. The bank was foreclosing, but the math didn't add up. If she only needed to stop foreclosure, she'd have demanded $200,000, not $467,000. I wrote it out on a legal pad. $467,000 minus $200,000 equals $267,000. A gaping, unexplained hole. I traced the HELOC funds through public filings and found a Delaware LLC called Vantage Peak Holdings, registered 18 months ago to a sole managing member, my brother Tyler. He hadn't secured investors. He'd conned our mother into mortgaging her house to fund his fantasy. Corporate expense records showed he'd blown the money on a matte black sports car, first-class trips to Tulum, 5-star networking retreats, and finally dumped the rest into cryptocurrency that crashed 95%. The house loan was gone, vaporized by his ego. But $267,000 was still missing, and Sandra had no other assets, no stocks, no second property. There was only one other pool of money left in our family. My grandmother Aloyse's irrevocable medical trust, the fund my late grandfather had set up to guarantee her care for life, with Sandra installed as trustee. Trustees have a fiduciary duty. Draining a medical trust isn't just cruelty, it's a federal crime. I checked the probate court's public docket and found the state's mandatory annual audit of the trust scheduled for May 28th, 14 days away. The timeline snapped into place with sickening clarity. Sandra drained the house for Tyler, he lost it all, the bank came calling, and rather than admit failure, she illegally pulled $267,000 from her own mother's care fund to bail him out again, gambling she could replace it before anyone noticed. The invoice wasn't about hurt feelings. It was a desperate, calculated extortion attempt to cover 2 collapsing ledgers before the auditors arrived. I hadn't seen Grandma Alois in 2 years. Sandra had isolated her in a new assisted living facility and controlled every visit. I took a cab to the northern suburbs, bluffed my way past the front desk with talk of the pending audit, and found my grandmother in her sunlit room, frail but sharp-eyed. She wasn't angry to see me. She was relieved and terrified. Sandra had visited days earlier sobbing that the stock market had crashed and the trust was empty, that Alois would have to move to a state facility within the week. It was gaslighting, engineered to explain away the missing money before the audit. I told her the truth. Sandra hadn't lost the money, she'd stolen it to save Tyler, and now she needed a cover story. My grandmother's fear hardened instantly into fury. She pulled a hidden manila envelope from her dresser drawer. Bank statements Sandra always tried to confiscate after making her sign acknowledgement forms, but Alois had learned from my grandfather never to destroy financial records. Inside was the smoking gun, a wire transfer authorization, in Sandra's handwriting, sending exactly $267,000 from the trust to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, beneficiary Vantage Peak Holdings, and at the bottom, my grandmother's signature, forged. Sandra had committed felony forgery on top of felony embezzlement. We agreed on a plan. Alois would play along, pretending to believe Sandra's lies, while I scanned every document into an encrypted, court-ready dossier. That evening, Sandra escalated in the group chat, announcing a mandatory family intervention at an upscale steakhouse that Friday the same deadline from her invoice, threatening to formally disown me if I didn't show up with a check. I RSVP'd without a word of protest, because she had just chosen the exact battlefield I needed. Friday night, I dressed like an executive walking into a boardroom, not a daughter walking into an ambush, and arrived at the private dining room to find all 26 relatives seated around a long table, one empty chair waiting for me at the far end like a witness stand. Sandra sat at the head in a mournful black dress, Tyler smug beside her. I sat down, looked her dead in the eye, and said only, "Good evening, Sandra, I'm here." "Let's begin," using her first name deliberately, and a gasp rippled through the room. She launched into a performance of maternal sacrifice and betrayal, and the family piled on, Aunt Diane clutching her pearls, Uncle Frank thundering that I owed her everything, Cousin Holly calling me a disgrace. Tyler stood and threatened a lawsuit for elder abuse, demanding I liquidate my savings to fund a trust for the very woman quietly disowning me. I let them scream themselves hoarse for 5 full minutes, needing every one of them fully committed to the lie before I detonated it. When Uncle Frank finally demanded an answer, I said calmly that I wasn't writing a check to fund a woman facing federal prison for embezzlement, then unlocked my phone and sent one image to the group chat. 26 phones buzzed at once. The picture was a forensic collage. The bank's default notice with the $200,000 balance circled in red. Beneath it, the wire authorization showing $267,000 moving from Alois's trust straight to Vantage Peak Holdings with her forged signature at the bottom. And in the center, the math spelled out in neon yellow, 200,000 plus 267,000 equals 467,000, the exact number from the invoice. The room transformed in real time. Uncle Frank, a secondary trust beneficiary who recognized the routing numbers by heart, went white as paper. Aunt Diane's hands shook as she read it. I stood, smoothed my jacket, and told them plainly. Sandra had mortgaged her house to fund Tyler's fake company, he'd blown it all on cars and crypto, and when the bank came calling, she'd forged her own mother's signature to steal $250,000 more, all to buy herself out of the auditor's path 14 days from then. Tyler, sweating, immediately threw our mother under the bus, insisting he never knew where the money came from. Sandra shrieked that the documents were fabricated, that I'd used my accounting skills to frame her, but nobody was listening anymore. Uncle Frank was already reading routing numbers aloud, confirming they matched his own trust statements. I turned and walked out through the double doors, leaving them to tear each other apart. In the car, I watched the group chat empty in real time. Uncle Frank left first, then Aunt Diane, then cousin after cousin, each exit accompanied by a brutal parting line and an instant block across every platform. Within 20 minutes, the chat that had spent a week torturing me had collapsed from 26 members to just 3, Sandra, Tyler and me. I left the group myself, blocked them both everywhere, and noticed only then that Grandma Alois had never posted a single angry word and never left the chat, because you don't block the number of someone you're actively suing into the ground. The legal avalanche hit that weekend. Alois's attorney filed an emergency injunction stripping Sandra of her trustee status, then handed the forged documents straight to federal prosecutors. Because the stolen funds crossed into a Cayman Islands account, it became a federal wire fraud case overnight. By Monday, Tyler's accounts were frozen, his crypto seized, and his sports car impounded as an asset bought with stolen money. Because Alois had co-signed the original mortgage decades earlier, her lawyers placed an immediate lien on the house, and with federal charges piling up, the bank abandoned any patience and accelerated the foreclosure. Sandra was staring down eviction and a mandatory minimum sentence for elder financial abuse and forgery, with no manipulation left that could save her. Days later, she called from an unknown number, sobbing that agents had seized her computer, that Tyler was sleeping on her couch with nothing left, begging me to pay for a lawyer and convince Alois to drop the charges. I listened to the entire voicemail without a flicker of guilt, deleted it, and blocked the new number. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done. She was only sorry she'd been caught. The following weekend, I visited my grandmother properly, no longer sneaking past a front desk, but welcomed as a permanent approved visitor. She poured tea from a silver service and told me the courts had frozen every account, the embezzlement charges were moving forward, and her trust was finally secure. We talked about everything except Sandra and Tyler, my clients, her late husband, nothing but two people enjoying each other's company without a shadow hanging over the table. For years, I had been the designated scapegoat in a family built on manipulation, conditioned to believe love was a debt I constantly owed. But I had used my own skills, my own numbers, to burn that entire structure to the ground and walk out untouched. Sometimes the heaviest bills we're handed are the ones we never actually owed, and the only way to clear them is to stop paying and start auditing. Exactly 1 week after the raid, my receptionist buzzed to say my family was in the lobby, calling it a life-or-death emergency. I let them up. They shuffled in unrecognizable, Bianca hollow-eyed in an oversized sweater, my parents aged and threadbare. Bianca begged for money to fund Trevor's defense and her own. My father stammered apologies. My mother, absurdly, claimed she'd always suspected Trevor. Then came the real request. They had nowhere to live and wanted my spare room. I felt nothing, not anger, not longing, just a clean, quiet emptiness where all those decades of aching for their approval used to live. I slid a single invoice across my desk, my standard consulting fee for the hours I'd spent unwinding their fraudulent mortgage. You made your choices, I told them. You chose the illusion. You chose him. I suggest the shelters. I hear they build character. I called security and had them escorted out, and I didn't look back as the glass doors sealed behind them. 6 months later, my new home was filled with the smell of roasted garlic and the sound of real laughter. My chosen family, the colleagues and friends who'd stood beside me through the entire ordeal, gathered to celebrate the launch of my own independent firm. Trevor was serving 20 years. My parents and Bianca had vanished into the wreckage of the life they'd built on someone else's back. I raised my glass, finally free, finally undeniable. What Trevor's downfall really exposes is this: loyalty demanded at the cost of your dignity isn't love, it's exploitation. My family valued a glittering illusion over their own daughter, and when the bill came due, they were the ones who couldn't pay it. Real power was never in the shouting or the spectacle. It was in the quiet preparation, the undeniable facts, and the refusal to participate in someone else's delusion. When people who are supposed to protect you throw you to the wolves instead, you owe them nothing, not your money, not your comfort, not your future. You're allowed to hand someone the bill for their own choices. You're allowed to walk away. Blood makes relatives, respect and integrity make family. I didn't lose mine. I simply chose it. Have you ever had to draw an ironclad line with relatives who only valued you when they needed saving? Tell me in the comments, and if this story resonated, hit like and subscribe for more. I felt no triumph watching it unfold, only a quiet, settled peace, the sense of a scale finally balancing itself. 6 weeks later, leaving my office at dusk, I found the three of them waiting outside in the cold, hollowed out and desperate. My mother sobbing that family was family, my father insisting I owed them a rescue, Grant begging me to buy the best defense money could find. And I looked at them for a long moment and told them simply that I had been fired for working 2 jobs, that they had taught me a valuable lesson about loyalty, and that I only had room for one priority now, and it was not them. And then I got into my car and drove away, watching them shrink to nothing in the mirror. A year later, in a warm stone house on a snow-covered hillside upstate, surrounded by Talia and Owen, and the partner who had helped me design every room of it, by mentors and colleagues who had become the family I actually chose, I raised a glass by the fire and understood the truest thing revenge had ever taught me, that it was never about anger or ruin. It was about building a life so bright and so whole that the people who tried to diminish you simply faded from the frame entirely.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.